Hi there, my name is Andy Morgenstern. I'm an optometrist from Bethesda, Maryland. Today we're going to talk about a topic. My title of my presentation is The Battle of the Bulge. It's all about the backside. So this topic is about really keratoconus, ectasia, some collagen corneal cross-linking, and really how it relates to ectatic disease like keratoconus and others. So here we go. First, obviously, here you can see in front of you a keratoconic cornea. And although when we look at this individual over here, you can see the curvature of the cornea, one of the considerations that we have historically is that front surface curvature because we're in the business of contact lenses, obviously, and making sure we can optimize vision. But we never really take a look at the back side of the cornea. So this picture, this is a depiction of the moon, looking at a topographical analysis. And one of the things I want to point out to you is that hopefully you would all agree with me that this looks like a topography of the moon. And when we talk about a topography here, when we look at the topography of the moon, as you can see by the colors over here, really discusses the elevation, the height, and the peaks and the troughs. It's based on elevation and not curvature. Whereas when we use our corneal topographer, it's measured in diopters. It's measured in curvature and not elevation. And so here, one of the things that we're going to discuss today is an evaluation of the cornea based on elevation as opposed to curvature. A couple of disclosures I have. I work with the AOA as a methodologist on their evidence-based optometry clinical practice guidelines, and I do work also with the U.S. government. I'm a contractor for a company called Shenega Health Services, and it's located at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and I work at the Vision Center of Excellence where we do research on vision dysfunction, eye diseases, eye conditions, and also eye trauma as it relates to military and veteran function. And so what I want to tell you is that this is my personal opinion only. This is not the opinion of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, or any other organization, including my contracting organization. This is my information only, and I gained all of it from my experience and in private practice and also in the public domain. These are companies that I'm happy to work with. I have no financial interest in any of the topics that I'm discussing today. I do want to let you know one of the things that I do work with is this International Keratoconus Academy of Eye Care Professionals, which is a great organization. It's free to join, and we have a ton of information where we interact with both doctors and patients, and we really want to disseminate information on corneal disease like keratoconus and then the other ectasias. And here you can see some of our executive board members. We also have a medical advisory board, and this group was founded by Barry Iden out of Chicago. And the four of us, Bill Tulo on the left, on the right, Barry Iden, second from right, Clark Chang, and myself on the left. These are the four founders at the Keratoconus Academy of Eye Care Professionals. We've done some great work. We lecture all over, and we get our information out there. All right, so why is understanding the cornea from an elevation perspective so important, and why is corneal cross-linking so important these days? Well, number one, it's FDA approved, so that has to be taken into consideration as a way to stop, halt, or slow down the progression of keratoconic disease. And it's specifically important. Obviously, we always worry about adults because we always think that keratoconus happens somewhere in the second to fourth decade of life. But really, it's the adolescents and children where we really want to get involved because this is when their vision's still good. If we can identify it as early as possible, now that we have a treatment mechanism to actually get this done and halted, we can actually save vision. So here's an article. I like to always discuss really high-quality articles. Here's an article, Progression of Keratoconus and Efficacy of Corneal Collagen Cross-Linking in Children and Adolescents, discussing progression rate. And this was really impressive. Now, obviously, we don't have an endless supply of patients that are pediatric keratocones, but in this study, 52 of 59 eyes enrolled in this study showed progression where their keratoconus got worse at a rate of 88%. What that is telling me is a couple things. Number one is that kids likely if they're coming into your office, you better watch them and you better watch them close because they're likely to get worse. The other thing it's telling me is that you really want to strongly consider cross-linking at its earliest identification of the disease because you can actually save vision here because there's a very high likelihood that these folks are going to get worse. And so This is why we need devices that look at not only the front surface of the cornea, but the back surface of the cornea as well. And I'm going to reference this machine a lot over here. I don't work for this company. This is an Oculus Pentacam. I'm going to discuss it because, quite frankly, I think it gives me the best information on corneal ectatic disease. It's been highlighted in all of the landmark studies as the device of choice. And quite frankly, you can't go to a refractive surgery center these days without seeing one. And so we're going to discuss how this works. There are other devices on the market. It's just my personal opinion. I think this one does the best job. That doesn't say the others don't do a great job. They do. This is the one that I have the most experience with. So here's a classic keratoconus image. And if you look at this, is the printout from the Pentacam over here, and you can see the name is whited out on this patient. But if you look at the image on the left, that image on the left is actually a normal cornea. And if you look at the top left map, that's your curvature map. That would be similar to what you call your topography. Bottom left is a distribution of the pachymetry of the cornea. The top right is actually an elevation map. So think of the patient lying down on a bed where their eyes are open and the cornea is coming up. And so what we're measuring is that elevation on not only on the front side of the cornea, which is the top right, but also the back side of the cornea, which is the bottom right. And that bottom right one is really one of the main points we're going to focus on today. So if you look at the map on the right side, the entirely other map, you can see in the top left corner what looks like a keratocone, which makes a lot of sense. But if you look at the bottom left image, you can see the pachymetry much thinner. Well, that makes sense too, because we know that keratoconic corneas typically get steeper, by the cone and more around the cone, and they also get thinner. But look at the maps on the right side, the top right, where it's the anterior surface elevation of the cornea. You can see that elevated point just below that dotted line, circular dotted line, which is the pupil. And on the back side of the corner, which is the bottom right picture, you can see the same spot where there's an elevation, but there's a greater elevation in that one spot, which tells me that the cornea is thinning out in that area because there's more elevation on the back side of the cornea than the front side of the cornea. The Oculus device, the Pentacam, also has software in it that was developed by Michael Bellin, ophthalmologist, and Renato Ambrosio, ophthalmologist. And they developed an analytic mechanism here where we can actually take the image and it automatically puts the data into essentially an analysis against normative data, normal corneas, and it basically highlights the picture that you're taking versus all of these other normals to give you distributions of how far outside of normal they are. At the end of the day, if you look at the bottom of the right image, you'll see a couple of rectangular boxes. 3 are red, and there's a white, and there's a yellow, and there's an overall red one. Those boxes are the white, yellow, and red, which obviously red being you better watch out because this could be a keratoconic or diseased cornea. So, like I said, we're going to look at the, no pun intended, but pun intended, the backside, if you look at the image of the babies on the left, of the cornea, and that's what this device does. Most topographers now use Placido disc imagery, and they don't get to look at the backside because what happens is here, if you look at that Placido disc image that the patient sees from the inside of the device, it's flashing a light and taking, the camera is in the dead center of that device. You can see where that hole is, right in the dead center. It's taking a picture of how light reflects off the front surface. It's not taking into account any of the elevation points on the back surface. And if we look at this device, this picture of the moon over here, what we're looking for again is the elevation mapping, because the elevation mapping is going to tell us where the peaks and the valleys are over here. And when you're looking at a cone, the cone starts to bulge out. Knowing where it's the highest elevation on the front surface and the back surface, that dictates where our pachymetry is. And that actually tells us where the weakest spot is. If you think about the cornea of a keratocone, the apex of the cone, the highest point of the cone, is typically the thinnest point, but the steepest point where the red on your topography happens is actually the steepest. It's the steepest point, not the most elevated point. The steepest point is typically below the cone, inferior to the cone, because that's where all the drop-off happens when it's measuring curvature and not elevation. And elevation is very important to us because that tells us the exact location of that cone and that thinnest point. And just like, I'm using the moon as an example, a topographical image of the moon. And just like the moon, when we throw a satellite, NASA throws a satellite up into space to take images of this moon to measure elevation. Well, how does it do it? Well, it goes into orbit and it rotates around to give us a three-dimensional image capture. And guess what? That Pentacam does the same thing. It's a rotational camera on a 45-degree angle that as it's rotating around the cornea in front of the eye, it's measuring elevation in a three-dimensional, non-relative manner. And what I mean by that is it's not fixating on a point, it's rotating around the entire cornea to build a replicated image. Now, one of the things that we have to remember, this is a great graphical video over here of a keratoconic cornea. So, for the most part, we're all eye doctors out there that are watching this video. We have a good understanding of the cornea and keratoconus in that we know that keratoconic corneas, they get steeper and they also get thinner. Well, how could you have a cornea get steeper and thinner? The cornea can't get thinner if both surfaces are moving forward at the same rate. If the cornea is bulging forward and it's bulging out, if the front and the back surface moved at the same rate, you would have no change in pachymetry. However, what's happening here is you can see the back surface is actually moving faster than the front surface is moving forward, and that's why you're getting a thinning. And so understanding that thinning and that elevation is really important. So obviously these cones come in all shapes and sizes. Here's a 59-year-old female presenting for contact lenses, and you can see different from the image before how much more red that back surface elevation is and how thin this cornea is over here. What we've realized is that the back surface really shows us the keratoconic disease earlier than the front surface. The front surface curvature change is relative to how much pushing forward you have of the back surface. And you can see the back surface elevation here is very, very high. It's measured in microns. I would almost say it's probably in the 130 microns of elevation off of what the BFS there, the best fit sphere, is calculated at. And I'll show you some images of that best fit sphere in a little bit. And this patient obviously had poor vision, and now we do the Pentacam screening, and they had some problems. And here's a much more mild case. But I want you to take note, number one, of the overall pachymetry, 475. Not, it's thin, but not terribly thin. If you look at the Ks are pretty flat. That's in the top left of the screen, K1 and K2. You have Ks of 40.5 and 42.1. Not necessarily steep, I would say. And but if you look at the elevation mapping on the right side, in the front and the back surface, well, the back surface elevation, we consider anything over 10 microns of elevation. I'm sorry, on the back surface, 15 microns of elevation off of the best fit sphere to be indicative of something that's not normal. And you can see that elevation there is probably somewhere between 47 and 50 microns of best fit sphere elevation. Whereas the front surface, not necessarily as bad. 10 microns of elevation over the best fit sphere is what we want to see and below as normal, and this one's in the 20. So not much change on the front surface, but significant change on the back surface. We're seeing an early disease of keratoconus start to express itself right here, and there are those points that I'm referring to. So Placido disc topography, what are the limitations of it? We're going to talk about elevation, tomography, which is what that Pentacam and the other devices are, and some other things like corneal biomechanics. So topography it's a detailed representation or description of the surface characteristics of a structure. It's a true topography. But Placido-based is really, like I said before, it's a reflection-based video keratography. And so the concentric rings reflected on the anterior corneal. Okay, moving along. This is also, it's a computer analysis of the distance between the reflected rings, as we all know, and that shows us more about steeper and flatter curvature on the front surface of the eye, and it gives us curvature data. And the elevation is derived from here, and one of the reasons why is that the camera, like we showed you before on the Placido disc image, is in the dead center of that Placido reflection, and as that reflection comes back, there's no way that there are rings in the actual center of the cornea, and so all of that information that's blocked out by the camera, it's kind of like the optic nerve blind spot we have in the back of our eye. That area does not measure anything, so we actually have to interpret the data, and the device actually has to make it up. Obviously, there's you can have many different types of Placido disc images. They're distributed in many different fashions, and you can see the different styles of images that we measure. The axial topography, this one obviously with a skewed radial axis.